of doing this.
It was like a
incentive.
trial.
Right,
See what this
and they
does.
did it for 2 years, and they thought, hey, this really worked well. So they extended it for another 2 years. It actually started 2006, 7, and then 2008 and 9. But the economy has changed, so nobody knows now what they're
But
going
that's the permanent one, it's already in place.
to do. Yes. So the incentives go away at the end of 2009, and this old law comes back into effect at that time. And so what happens? Well, Ray's not going to be able to realize $1.4 million. He's going to lose about $1 million in cash out of his jeans because of the way the tax law changes. Okay, go ahead, next slide. Let's look at his estate tax consequences. So, Ray's single, he's got an $11 million estate. A big part of that is his land, okay? This entire $7 million in this calculation is subject to a 45% estate tax. He's got to come up with over $3 million to pay the federal government if he drops dead. He places the $5 million conservation easement on his property and reduces the value. He also takes the $500,000 exclusion that I mentioned before under that provision of the tax code that allows for that extra benefit. So he's reduced the fair market value of the ranch to $1,700,000. Now his estate tax on that same piece of property, has been dramatically reduced. And so he saves over almost $2.5 million in federal estate tax. Now this is certainly a situation that could happen. If Ray was married, it might be a different outcome. Okay? But for a single person, you have $3.5 million in federal estate tax credit. So if you have less than that $3.5 million, you don't pay any federal estate tax. Most of us will never see it. But someone that owns a big piece of valuable property, it's going to drive them, just like the client that I mentioned before, to look seriously at doing conservation easement for this reason. Capital gain tax, so Ray bought the property, as I mentioned, for $300,000. He put some improvements into it. Okay, so he has some gain. If he were to sell the property without the easement, he'd have to pay, a large share of capital gain tax. If he sells it after the easement, he pays less. So he saves $750,000 in capital gains tax. Again, I'm just plugging in some numbers here to help you understand the concepts that are involved here. So summing up the tax benefits, in 2009, he donates an easement worth $5 million. And he has all of these tax savings here. And we mentioned too the possibility that because he has this rural property that's currently in ag, if he loses his ag valuation and he's forced into a rollback situation, the lower fair market value of that property will save him property tax valuation. Go ahead. You can use conservation easements as part of a comprehensive plan to plan and manage your estate, your property. Okay. So many people have family limited partnerships, or maybe they have multiple owners. We have to analyze the impact of doing an easement in those situations. If it's a pass-through entity, like a family limited partnership, all of the partners receive the benefit. Okay? Just like in any partnership, everyone receives the benefit of the income that the partnership generates, and they write off the expenses. Similarly, the benefits flow through in a family limited partnership, or where there's multiple owners. Sometimes people will take the tax savings, okay, the money that they save every year from paying the federal government, and they'll invest those in a separate trust. They do it in a way that doesn't create any estate tax liability, so it's not a taxable situation. And that money then grows separately, and it's used to maintain the property in perpetuity. It's used to replace value for the next generation who receives something, maybe through an insurance policy. If mom and dad place an easement on the property, they take the tax savings, they purchase an insurance property, park it in this separate little trust, this little entity. When they die, the money goes to the kids are happy. They got the money that they wanted from the land, and they got the land. And the parents are happy because the land is protected, and it didn't really cost them anything. Land management trust, you should consider, if you're going to restrict the land, that you do something to help the next generation pay the costs. If they can't make a living on the property by subdividing it and creating, a stream of income that way, then you have to do something to address this issue of the long-term burden that the next generation is going to receive if they can't develop the land. Charitable giving could be part of a strategy there. You can do tax-free exchanges in some of these transactions. A special use valuation is still available for rural property that's used for agricultural purposes. And always when you're doing something this significant, which for most people impacts the most valuable asset that they have, you have to consider integrating it into your own comprehensive estate plan. Go ahead, Brent. Next. All right. There's many different ways that you can structure this transaction. It could be a straight donation, it could be a sale like we mentioned, it can be a combination of those two, which is called a bargain sale under the tax code. So it's a part sale and part donation.
What's it called?
A bargain sale. You can phase it in over multiple tax years. Now this isn't a technique that's used very common in Texas, but there might be certain reasons why that would be done. And I'm working with a family now. It's 4 siblings that own 7,000 acres in Mason County. And they're thinking of putting an easement over the portion of the property that's most valuable that they want to protect, which is a couple of miles along the San Saba River. So they want to protect that, but they're going to leave out other portions because they want to experiment with this with the family and figure out how they're going to divide the property and do some other things, and then later put other portions under easement. So that's possible. If you're going to donate it, I would recommend a simple little letter with the land trust so that you as the owner of the property are making clear your wishes to make this donation, because if something should happen to you, it's good that there's a record of what you intended, okay? If you want your heirs or your executors of your estate to act upon those wishes. You can also donate conservation easements after your death. And I've done this in cases in Colorado where I worked. We did really an amazing transaction, saved the family millions of dollars in federal estate taxes, and also created a stream of income for that family as well with the state tax credit by donating a portion of, a conservation easement on a portion of the ranch at the husband's death. And then the wife just passed away a few months ago. The donation was complete at that time, so we saved them millions of dollars in federal estate taxes. So it's possible to do after you're gone, but you have to have it memorialized if that's what you want. So usually people incorporate that into their will or their living trust. This is what I want done with the property, and they give a set of instructions, maybe even the types of restrictions that they're interested in having, so that the executor has some tracks to run on. This is a little more complex, and you obviously need good legal advice at that point, but it can be done. Go ahead. So these are the steps to walk through this transaction, and these are kind of arbitrary in a certain sense. Every transaction is different, but it follows through this general set of steps. You have to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish with this thing. You have to determine your goals for what it is you want to protect. And that is not only for you personally as the owner of the property, but for your family. Like in Ken's case, he's got a family that will take the ranch after him, after he's gone. And so there's a little bit of intergenerational discussion that often has to happen with the next generation. At least I recommend that. So that they understand what it is you're trying to do. And there's that buy-in. And also you have to understand the financial goals. You have to look at the different outcomes. Doing the transaction this year as opposed to next year. Doing it an outright donation, maybe hanging out for a couple of years and trying to find some money for a part purchase of the conservation easement through the federal government or some other source. So you have to analyze all of those different financial outcomes. You have to select and negotiate with the land trust. And I mentioned before that's one of our jobs, is to make that partnering. And for those of you in this neck of the woods, of course, Cibolo Conservancy is the first door to knock on here. create the transaction team, we'll talk about that in a minute.